Imagine you are standing in a valley in central Mexico. The year is approximately 100 AD. Behind you, a volcano rises against the morning sky. Ahead of you stretches a road, 40 meters wide, wider than any street you have ever walked, running arrow straight toward another mountain on the horizon. On your left, a pyramid the height of a 20-story building glows red in the rising sun. Around you, a city of at least 125,000 people, apartment compounds housing dozens of families each, their walls covered floor to ceiling in murals of jaguars and rain gods and feathered serpents. Markets, workshops, temples, courtyards filled with the sound of obsidian being worked into blades so sharp they could cut through bone. This is the largest city in the Western Hemisphere, the sixth largest city on Earth. And in 1,000 years, no one will know its name. The Aztecs arrived here in the 14th century, more than 700 years after this city had been abandoned. They found the ruins standing in the valley, pyramids half buried in earth and vegetation, the great avenue still visible beneath centuries of debris. The apartment compounds collapsed but still recognizable in their grid. They had no idea who had built it. They named it Teotihuacan, a Nahuatl word meaning the place where the gods were born. Every name we use for this city, the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, the Avenue of the Dead, every name comes from the Aztecs. They are guesses, poetic guesses, but guesses. The people who built this place called it something else. We will never know what. This is where the mystery begins. Not with the pyramids. We have pyramids from a dozen civilizations. The mystery is the silence. Of all the great cities of the ancient world, Rome, Alexandria, Babylon, Persepolis, Teotihuacan is the only one that left no deciphered written record of itself. No king lists, no foundation myths, no names of rulers, no accounts of battles or treaties or laws. A civilization powerful enough to reshape the entire cultural landscape of Mesoamerica. A civilization whose artistic style, religious iconography, and urban planning principles spread across thousands of miles to influence the Maya, the Zapotecs, the Toltecs, and eventually the Aztecs themselves. And we do not know what language they spoke. We do not know what they called their gods. We do not know what happened to them. What we know from stone. The Valley of Teotihuacan sits at 2,300 meters above sea level, roughly 1.5 times the elevation of Denver, about 50 kilometers northeast of what is now Mexico City. Settlement began here around 400 BC. For centuries, it was one of several competing towns in the basin of Mexico. Nothing suggested it would become anything extraordinary. Then, around 100 BC, something shifted. A series of volcanic eruptions, possibly from the nearby volcano Popocatépetl, destroyed competing settlements across the valley. Refugees flooded into Teotihuacan. The population surged. And whoever was in charge of the city at that moment made a decision that would define everything that followed. They started planning. Not building individual structures and hoping for the best, which is how most ancient cities grew, organically, street by street, generation by generation. They planned the entire city at once. a comprehensive urban vision executed over generations with a consistency that suggests either extraordinary institutional continuity or a founding blueprint so powerful that every subsequent ruler felt bound to honor it. The Avenue of the Dead was laid out first, 40 meters wide, oriented 15.5 degrees east of true north, a deviation that was not a mistake. This precise angle aligns the avenue with the setting sun on August 13th, one of the most sacred dates in the Mesoamerican calendar, and with the rising of the Pleiades constellation. The city was aligned with the cosmos before the first stone was placed. From this central axis, a grid of streets and drainage channels was extended across the valley floor. Each residential compound was sized to fit the grid. Each district had a defined function. The city was zoned: trade districts, craft districts, residential districts, ethnic districts, before the concept of urban zoning existed anywhere else on Earth. There was one more remarkable act of civil engineering in the founding of the city. The San Juan River, which naturally ran its own course through the valley, was rerouted, deliberately diverted by canal to cross the Avenue of the Dead at a right angle. The builders did not work around the river. They moved it to fit their plan. By 200 AD, the major pyramids were complete. By 400 AD, at its height, Teotihuacan was home to perhaps 200,000 people. It covered 21 square kilometers. For context, the city of Rome at its height covered approximately 14 square kilometers. Teotihuacan was larger. Stand at the southern end of the Avenue of the Dead and look north. The road stretches before you for 4 kilometers. Along its length, it rises and falls through a series of terraced plazas, each one a separate spatial room, marked by low walls and stairways that you must climb to enter. You do not simply walk this avenue, you ascend it. The city is designed to be experienced as a sequence of thresholds, each one marking a transition between spaces of different sacred significance. This is not accidental. It is architecture making an argument about the relationship between the human and the divine. Each step upward, a step closer to the realm of the gods who were born here. On your right, the Pyramid of the Sun, the largest structure in the city and the third largest pyramid ever constructed by any civilization on Earth. Its base covers more ground than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its 5 terraced levels rise 66 meters into the sky, the height of a 20-story building. In its original state, the entire surface was coated in lime plaster and painted bright red, a color visible across the entire valley from dawn, a beacon announcing this place to everyone within sight of the mountains. 1.2 million tons of material went into its construction. Without metal tools, without the wheel, without draft animals capable of bearing loads. Every stone was cut by hand and carried by human labor. The logistics of coordinating that effort, the quarrying, the transport, the placement, the plastering, across decades of construction would challenge a modern project manager. 4,000 years ago, someone solved it. Beneath it, a tunnel. Discovered in 1971 during the installation of a light show, the tunnel runs from near the Avenue of the Dead directly under the pyramid terminating in a cloverleaf-shaped cave chamber. This cave was not a later addition. It predates the pyramid. The pyramid was built directly over it. The cave appears to have been a natural spring. In Mesoamerican cosmology, caves were portals to the underworld, places where the boundary between the human world and the sacred world grew thin. The builders of Teotihuacan did not simply construct a pyramid. They built a pyramid over a portal and made it the center of their city. The Pyramid of the Moon stands at the northern terminus of the avenue, smaller than the Sun Pyramid, but positioned higher on the natural terrain, so the two summits appear at the same height when viewed from the south. This is not an accident. The architects accounted for the slope of the valley in their calculations and adjusted the pyramid's height accordingly. Behind the Pyramid of the Moon, the mountain Cerro Gordo fills the horizon, its summit directly on the axis of the avenue. The pyramid does not block the mountain, it frames it. The builders integrated the natural landscape into their urban composition as deliberately as any Renaissance architect placing a cathedral at the end of a boulevard. The effect, standing at the southern end of the avenue and looking north, is of an infinite axis extending from the city into the mountain into the sky, a line that connects the human world to something beyond it. Now leave the avenue and walk east into the residential districts. The apartment compounds of Teotihuacan are extraordinary and almost universally underappreciated. Visitors come for the pyramids and walk past the compounds without stopping. This is a mistake. The compounds are where the real story of this city lives. Each is a self-contained neighborhood, a cluster of rooms arranged around one or more interior courtyards, housing between 60 and 100 people, extended families perhaps, or occupational guilds, or ethnic communities from the same distant region. The walls facing the street are blank. No windows, no doors, no decoration. The life of the compound is entirely inward-facing, oriented toward the courtyard and its sky. Step inside and everything changes. Every wall surface is covered in painted murals. Not decoration, cosmological programs. Jaguars carrying feathered headdresses. The rain god Tlaloc with his goggled eyes pouring streams of water from his hands. Processions of priests in robes of green and red. Butterflies emerging from shells. Feathered serpents coiling through fields of flowers. The entire mythological world of Teotihuacan, rendered in vivid pigments on every available surface, turning each interior space into an immersive environment, a world within a world. These were true frescoes. The pigment was not painted on top of the plaster. It was embedded into the wet plaster as it dried, becoming part of the wall itself. This is why fragments survive after 1,800 years. The paintings are not coating the surface. They are the surface. The pigments were ground from minerals, red from iron oxide, green from copper, yellow from iron hydroxide, blue from a manufactured compound unique to Mesoamerica, Maya blue, a color so chemically stable that it has survived millennia without fading. Researchers have analyzed the formula of Maya blue and found it to be a combination of indigo dye and palygorskite clay, fired at a specific temperature to create a molecular bond that resists acids, biologic degradation, and centuries of exposure. It was not discovered. it was engineered. The floors of these compounds conceal cisterns, large underground water storage tanks fed by an ingenious network of channels and drains. Each compound had its own water supply, independent of its neighbors. This is not primitive urban planning. This is sophisticated infrastructure thinking, the same principle that underlies modern building codes requiring each structure to have independent utility connections. And here is what troubles archaeologists most about these compounds. The commoners of Teotihuacan lived remarkably well. Archaeological evidence from the outer districts, areas like Tlajinga on the southern periphery of the city, shows apartment compounds built from stone with lime plaster floors, built-in drainage, open courtyards, and murals. These were not the elite compounds near the avenue. These were working-class neighborhoods. Physical evidence makes the point with uncomfortable precision. Analysis of skeletal remains shows that males buried in peripheral apartment compounds were less than 1 centimeter shorter on average than elites buried near the Pyramid of the Moon. In ancient Egypt, commoners were 9 centimeters shorter than royals. In Mycenae, 6 centimeters. Teotihuacan's height differential is almost invisible. What does that tell us? It tells us that the nutritional gap between rich and poor in this city was smaller than almost anywhere else in the ancient world. The city fed its people. This brings us to one of the most debated questions in the archaeology of Teotihuacan, and one of the most quietly radical ideas in the study of ancient cities. Was Teotihuacan, by the standards of its time, an egalitarian state? The question sounds anachronistic, but consider the evidence. The apartment compounds are standardized across the city. The average home measured approximately 200 square meters, roughly the size of a tennis court. Mexica dwellings in the Aztec era typically measured 1/8 that size. The people of Teotihuacan, across social classes, lived in comparably sized homes. There are no palaces at Teotihuacan, not in the sense of a single, overwhelming structure that announces the presence and power of a ruler. The compounds near the avenue are larger and more elaborately decorated than those at the periphery. There is social differentiation. But the differential is subtle compared to the pharaoh's palace rising above the workers' huts of Egypt, or the emperor's forbidden city surrounded by the warrens of Beijing. No individual ruler's name appears anywhere in the archaeological record of Teotihuacan. No statue celebrates a specific person. No tomb has been identified as a royal burial in the way that Tutankhamun's tomb or Pakal's sarcophagus announce a singular individual's supremacy over all others. The murals throughout the city repeat the same deities and cosmological symbols across every district, every social class, every ethnic neighborhood. The visual vocabulary of the city is shared, not reserved for the elite. Some archaeologists have argued that this represents a deliberate political project, a state that constructed its legitimacy not through the glorification of a king, but through a shared civic identity, maintained through shared imagery, shared infrastructure, shared urban form. A city that said, in the language of its buildings, "We are all Teotihuacan." Whether this was genuinely egalitarian or whether it was a sophisticated form of social control, using shared symbols to bind a diverse population to a single political project, is a question the Stearns cannot fully answer. but the stones do suggest something remarkable. The most powerful city in the ancient Americas may have chosen, at the moment of its greatest power, not to build a throne. Teotihuacan was not merely a city. It was an imperial project, and the evidence for this is written in the ruins of cities 1,000 miles away. Maya inscriptions from multiple sites record an individual known to scholars as Spear Thrower Owl, apparently a ruler of Teotihuacan, who reigned for more than 60 years and whose representatives traveled to and possibly conquered Maya city-states as distant as Honduras. Teotihuacan-style military regalia appears in Maya elite burials. Teotihuacan architectural styles appear in the foundations of Caminaljuyu in Guatemala. The iconography of the feathered serpent, born in this valley, spread across the entire Mesoamerican world and remained in continuous use for 1,000 years after the city's fall. This was an empire that projected power not primarily through garrisoned fortresses and occupation armies, though some of that may have occurred, but through the soft power of cultural prestige. Merchants from Teotihuacan carried not only obsidian and ceramics, but an entire visual and cosmological system to every corner of the known world. The city controlled the most important obsidian source in all of Mesoamerica, the Pachuca Quarry, whose distinctive iridescent green obsidian has been found from the American Southwest to the Yucatan Peninsula. Whoever controlled Teotihuacan controlled the supply chain of the most essential tool material of the age. An obsidian blade from Pachuca could be traded at every market from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific. In the city's northeastern district, the Merchants' Barrio, archaeologists have identified a neighborhood specifically organized around long-distance trade, with residents maintaining connections to Veracruz on the Gulf Coast. Their imports included jade, amber, flint, and shells. Other districts maintained connections to Oaxaca, to Guatemala, to regions whose names we do not know. Teotihuacan was not just the largest city in the Western Hemisphere. It was the center of the world as its inhabitants understood it, a node through which the materials and ideas of a continent flowed, were transformed, and flowed outward again. At the southern end of the Avenue of the Dead, enclosed within a massive rectangular compound the Spanish would later call the Citadel, stands the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. It is the most decorated building in the city, and beneath it lies the darkest secret. The facade is covered in stone heads projecting from the wall in alternating rows. The feathered serpent, its scales carved in relief, its mouth open, its eyes once inlaid with obsidian mirrors that would have caught the light and thrown it back at anyone approaching. And a second deity, possibly the storm god, possibly something older, framed by a collar of feathers. 365 heads in total, one for each day of the solar year. The temple is a calendar made of stone. Research by archaeologist Julie Gazzola suggests the Citadel complex may have also served as an astronomical observatory, its proportions and orientations calibrated to track celestial events with the same precision the city applied to everything else it built. In 1983, archaeologists discovered something beneath the temple. A tunnel, sealed approximately 1,800 years ago, running 103 meters from the entrance of the Ciudadela to a chamber beneath the pyramid. When researchers entered fully in the 2000s, they found it largely untouched since the day it was closed. The floor of the tunnel was covered in powdered pyrite, iron sulfide that would have glittered like a mirror in torchlight, creating the impression of a star field beneath the feet. Along the walls, more pyrite mirrors, clusters of them, arranged to reflect light from multiple angles. Jade figurines, rubber balls, the sacred object of the Mesoamerican ball game associated with the movements of celestial bodies. Jaguar bones. And scattered throughout, liquid mercury. Large pools of it poured deliberately into the chamber. Mercury does not occur naturally in the Teotihuacan Valley. It was brought here in significant quantities from distant sources, a logistical effort that itself signals the importance of what was being constructed underground. And in Mesoamerican cosmology, mercury, silver liquid that moved like water but was not water, was associated with sacred lakes, with the underworld, with the surface between worlds. Over a decade of excavation in that tunnel yielded more than 50,000 individual objects. Greenstone figures that may represent the founding ancestors of the city. Storm god vessels in enormous quantities. Shells from the Gulf of Mexico incised with imagery from multiple Mesoamerican traditions, evidence that even early in the city's history, Teotihuacan was already a continental crossroads. The chamber was not a tomb. There are no human remains that suggest a royal burial. The chamber was a model of the cosmos, a constructed underworld built directly beneath the city's most important religious monument. And in the pyramids themselves, the Moon Pyramid in particular, excavators found the remains of over 200 sacrificial victims buried in different stages of the pyramid's construction, many with their hands bound behind their backs. Some were accompanied by animals, pumas, eagles, serpents, animals pictured throughout the city's murals as symbols of power and the divine. Warriors, possibly, or prisoners of war, sacrificed at the dedication of each new building stage. The city that appears to have been built for everyone, whose residential architecture suggests equality, whose markets and infrastructure served a population of hundreds of thousands, also built its sacred monuments on sacrifice. This is the contradiction at the heart of Teotihuacan, and we may never fully resolve it. Walk through the markets of Teotihuacan at its height, and you would find goods from across the continent. Obsidian blades from the city's own quarries, the sharpest cutting tools available in the pre-metal Americas, so fine that a single controlled strike could produce an edge sharper than surgical steel. Teotihuacan's obsidian industry was not a cottage craft. A large workshop has been identified directly adjacent to the Temple of the Moon, centrally located, close to the ceremonial heart of the city, a deliberate choice that placed industrial production within sight of the sacred. Thin orange pottery, a distinctive fine ceramic whose manufacturing location outside the city suggests Teotihuacan controlled production networks that reached beyond its walls. These vessels are stackable, made for transport, found across Mesoamerica. They are the ancient world equivalent of a branded product with international distribution. Walk past the market and into one of the residential craft districts. In the artisans' compound at La Ventilla, one of the most extensively excavated neighborhoods, Workers produced goods from bone, obsidian, and stone, including the distinctive flat stone masks that became one of Teotihuacan's most recognizable exports. Hundreds of these masks have been found across Mesoamerica. They are remarkably uniform, as if produced to a standard specification. A Teotihuacan mask found in a Maya burial in Guatemala looks almost identical to one found in a burial beneath the city itself. This is not coincidence. This is branding. The people who lived in these compounds came from across Mesoamerica. The multi-ethnic character of Teotihuacan was not merely tolerated. It appears to have been organized and institutionalized. The Zapotec residents of the western districts maintained their own burial practices, their own ceramic styles, their own deity figures. The residents of the merchants' barrio in the northeast maintained ties to Veracruz that are archaeologically traceable across generations. And yet, they all lived within the same grid, used the same street widths, built their courtyards to the same proportions, painted their walls with imagery that, while incorporating regional variations, drew from the same shared visual vocabulary. 3 writing systems have been identified within the city: Teotihuacan's own glyph system, Maya hieroglyphs, and Zapotec script. A child growing up in the city would have encountered, in the course of a single afternoon's walk through the market, the languages, gods, clothing, and food of a dozen cultures. They were citizens of the largest city on their continent, in an age when most of the world had never seen a city at all. The clothing they wore told their story. Elites dressed in finely woven cotton embroidered with feathers, shells, and jade ornaments. Commoners wore garments of maguey fiber, the agave plant that still covers the Mexican highland valleys today. Both practiced body modification, tooth inlays of jade and pyrite, cranial shaping from infancy, body paint in colors that signaled identity, status, and ritual role. The teeth of workers found in peripheral compounds show patterns of wear consistent with people who worked fibers with their front teeth. Weavers, perhaps, or rope makers. Their bones carry the marks of repetitive labor. Their graves contained simple offerings. But their homes had murals. Their neighborhoods had cisterns. Their children grew almost as tall as the children of the elite. This city worked. For its time, in its place, it worked in ways that most ancient cities did not. Around 550 AD, something went wrong. The evidence is in the burn patterns. Archaeologists excavating the Avenue of the Dead found that the major public buildings, the palaces, the temples, the administrative complexes along the avenue's length, had been deliberately set on fire, systematically, burned hot enough to destroy the plaster murals, to crack the stone sculptures, to leave char marks that have survived 15 centuries. The burn marks cluster on elite structures, the Street of the Dead complex, the palace buildings near the central pyramids, the administrative centers whose functions we can only guess at. But the residential compounds in the outer districts? Largely untouched. This pattern has a name in the study of collapsed civilizations: selective destruction. The markers of power were targeted. The homes of ordinary people were not. The fire did not come from outside. No army marching on a city burns the government buildings and leaves the housing intact. Armies burn everything or nothing, depending on their orders and their discipline. This fire was set by people who knew exactly what they were burning and what to spare. What happened in the decades before the fire, we cannot say with certainty. The political structure of Teotihuacan was already shifting. Evidence from earlier centuries suggests a transition from concentrated royal power, if such a thing ever existed here, to something more distributed, more bureaucratic. The great residential construction boom of the 4th and 5th centuries, when 2,200 apartment compounds were built across the city, suggests a period of state investment in the welfare of the general population. Perhaps that investment created expectations that the state could no longer meet. Perhaps the redistribution of resources created factions among those who had benefited most from the old order. Climate records suggest a series of droughts in the 6th century across central Mexico, droughts that would have strained any city's ability to feed its population. A city of 200,000 people consuming enormous quantities of maize, beans, and squash from the surrounding valley would have felt a sustained drought not as an inconvenience, but as an existential threat. The combination: internal political stress, climate pressure, the accumulated weight of sustaining the largest city on the continent for 5 centuries, may have been enough. By 650 AD, Teotihuacan was largely abandoned. A population that had numbered in the hundreds of thousands had scattered across the landscape of central Mexico. The great apartments stood empty. The markets fell silent. The avenue that had been the axis of the largest city in the Western Hemisphere became a path through ruins. The gods, whoever they were, had left. Teotihuacan did not disappear from history when it was abandoned. It disappeared from living memory and was replaced by myth. The cultures that came after, the Toltecs, the Mixtecs, and eventually the Aztecs, all claimed some connection to this place. The Aztecs made it a pilgrimage site. Their emperor, Moctezuma, visited regularly, conducting ceremonies among ruins that were already ancient by his time. After the Spanish conquest, the ruins were incorporated into colonial-era legends of giants and titans who had built an unimaginable civilization in the deep past. The artistic style of Teotihuacan, its distinctive way of representing the feathered serpent, the rain god, the great goddess, spread so thoroughly across Mesoamerica that it became the common visual language of the entire region for centuries. You can identify Teotihuacan influence in Maya temples hundreds of miles away, in Zapotec ceramics, in the iconography of cultures that had never had direct contact with the city itself. The ideas outlasted the city by a millennium. Its urban planning model, the grid, the zoning, the integration of infrastructure with monumental architecture, the standardized housing compound, influenced every major city built in central Mexico for the next 1,000 years. And today, 95% of the site remains unexcavated. The city that shaped a continent is still mostly underground. The fields surrounding the excavated ceremonial core contain subtle mounds and depressions that aerial photography and ground-penetrating radar have identified as buried structures. Neighborhoods, workshops, temples, waiting beneath the soil of modern Mexico. Every season, archaeologists announce new discoveries. A tunnel here, a cache of offerings there, a district whose function reframes our understanding of how the city was organized. The 2003 exploration of the tunnel beneath the Feathered Serpent Temple took more than a decade and yielded over 50,000 objects. The full excavation of that tunnel and its chambers is still ongoing. The city keeps giving up its secrets, slowly, in the way that stone gives up heat, reluctantly, in small amounts, long after the fire has gone out. Somewhere beneath the fields around the Avenue of the Dead, there are almost certainly records we have not found. Evidence of who these people were, what they called themselves, what they believed was worth building a city for. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the silence is the point. Perhaps a civilization that chose to leave no king's name in stone, that built its greatest monuments over caves and underworlds rather than over tombs of rulers, intended, from the beginning, to be remembered as a place rather than a person. Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. The place. If you found this episode worth your time, the best thing you can do is subscribe. It costs nothing, and it helps this channel reach the people looking for exactly this kind of history. Next week, Göbekli Tepe, a temple built 11,500 years ago, before agriculture, before pottery, before any other monument we know of, by people we still cannot explain. I'll see you there.